What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another Warhammer 40k tournament tech talk. This is the 40k video series where I pick a list that did pretty well over the last week of competitive play, and we talk about every aspect of it, from the event it played in, the matchups it played against, and the list itself. So let's get into it. Remember, if you like this style of content, go ahead and throw a like on the video, throw a subscribe on the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Helps you get notified when I make new videos like this, and that's very exciting for everyone. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about Ben Allen's Harlequins list. That's right, everybody. While they're staring down the barrel of a brand new codex with a bunch of new rules and mechanics, both for Craft World Eldari as well as Harlequins, Ben Allen's out here winning GTs with Harlequins before getting all those new brand shiny rules. Now, back in the heady days of early 9th edition, Harlequins were one of the power lists in the metagame. They were able to exercise such vast primary objective control over their opponents that it was very hard to get up on them, and a good Harlequins player could absolutely pick you apart. Although they've been power crept pretty hard by more recent releases, and we haven't really seen them do too well in a long time. It's probably been a year or so since Harlequins were a real contender in the metagame, but Ben Allen over here showing us up. Now, this is the part where I would normally talk about some info about the event itself, but unfortunately, I actually don't have much. The event was just called 40k Matched Play Event, which is a pretty apt name, I guess. According to the BCP listing, it was held at Warhammer World, so that's cool. Other than that, it's a 52-player GT that ran 5 rounds and had 2 undefeated at the end. So that's all you get, I guess. So anyway, let's talk about the Harlequins list itself. Now, this is a list entirely out of the Soaring Spite Mask. This allows the units that are embarked in transports to advance and fire their pistol weapons without penalty. This is a very popular mask because it allows you to take your powerfully pistol-armed Harlequin troopers and put them into transports and advance those transports around the table, giving you pretty ludicrous threat range. In this case, it's going to be fusion pistols. The other benefit of the sub-faction is it allows you to advance and fire weapons without penalty if you have the fly keyword. We don't have any non-transport units with fly, though, so it's not going to be that big of a deal, because the list is going to be mostly focused on infantry in those Star Weavers. Starting out the list, we have a Harlequins Battalion, this bringing a Troop Master with Choreographer of War and Darkness Bite. That's with the Pivotal Role Stratagem to give him 2 pivotal roll abilities. The Troop Masters normally have that Choreographer of War ability, which gives them a 6-inch bubble of reroll wounds in the fight phase. Darkness Bite, on top of that, is going to give him an additional 2 mortal wounds to whatever he attacks. He's armed with a fusion pistol, as well as the Twilight Fang with the Sky Strider Warlord trait. Now, this guy is a pretty sick combo. The Sky Strider Warlord trait allows him to disembark out of a transport after it has moved rather than before, which gives him a pretty ludicrous threat range when everything is considered. The Twilight Fang gives him a pretty respectable 2 damage weapon, and alongside him being affected by his own reroll aura means that he's going to be making a boatload of attacks, rerolling all of his wound rolls and dealing 2 additional mortal wounds on top. The Twilight Fang does get more powerful as the game goes on because it adds a number of attacks equal to the battle round number of the game. So if you're able to commit this guy on round 5, he actually gets +5 attacks, but oftentimes you'll see him go in turn 2 or 3, and the Twilight Fang is only good for +2 or 3 attacks. That said, you can usually get this guy to sink into the softest and squishiest part of your opponent's army because his threat range is so ludicrous. Let's talk about the entirety of the combo. Each of the Star Weavers in the list can advance 22 inches because they turbo boost for an additional 6 inches when they would go to advance. You can then, because of that Sky Strider Warlord trait, disembark this guy after the transport has moved, wholly within 3 inches of the transport, so essentially moving him 25 inches from the transport's initial starting position. He can then, using Warrior Acrobat if necessary, advance 14 inches, where your acrobats will give him an automatic 6 on his advance roll rather than rolling for it normally. That's because due to the Rising Crescendo ability, this guy can advance and charge in the same turn without penalty. In total, if we're doing all the math, that gives him a effective 39 inches of movement before he charges, meaning he's going to be charging somewhere around 45 inches pretty consistently. Then, if you need to, he can use Curtain Falls to move in any direction instead of consolidating after he fights, which, being a normal move, potentially allows him to get back into a transport if there's one nearby. This makes this guy while not the most lethal Smash character in the world, probably the fastest and easiest to retarget. And especially if the Harlequin player goes first, they have multiple ways to redeploy their units between 100 Swords of Vol to redeploy 1 of them, and Polychromatic Storm for 2 CP to redeploy 3 of them. You could potentially be repositioning this guy Starweaver almost anywhere on the table. So if the Harlequin player is able to go first, they can redeploy that Starweaver from one side of the table to the other, then use that 39 inches of movement to rocket this dude into whatever important unit your opponent wants to be keeping safe. Alongside that flip belt's ability to allow him to move and charge over models, it's extremely difficult to keep your important units or characters safe from the Smash Master. Now, filling out the rest of the HQ slots in this battalion, we do have a second Troop Master. This guy also bringing Choreographer of War as well as the Domino Shroud. This lets him, at the end of any phase, teleport 12 inches. So you can use that both to protect him. If he is in danger of being attacked, he can just port out of combat or away from enemies that would potentially charge him. Or you can use it more offensively to push him farther up the table in order to get his reroll auras up on player troops that are up in the front, mixing it up with your opponent. This is one of my favorite relics because it has so many options, both useful defensively and offensively, and really helps cement Harlequins as one of these high skill cap factions where you have a lot of abilities to be able to move your units around, and using those to their most effect is going to determine whether you win or lose. Following that up, we begin the cavalcade of Harlequin troops. In our troop selection, we have, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Harlequin troops, each with 5 players with fusion pistols, 4 of them being equipped with Harlequin caresses. Those caresses bringing them up to a relatively impressive strength 5 with AP 2, and with 4 attacks apiece and access to full rerolls to wound from those troop masters, that's a pretty reasonable offensive stat line. Especially in a world of damage reduction, having those fusion pistols to be dealing big chunks of D6 damage to people, in addition to a bevy of 1 damage attacks from the Harlequin caresses. These guys have the correct defensive profiles to be able to fight into those damage reduction effects. We also have 1 dude with a Harlequin blade in each of those troops. That guy is mostly there if one model dies to an exploding transport. You can pull a guy without a melee weapon. In the dedicated transport slot, each of those troops gets their own dedicated Starweaver. We got 6 Starweavers in that slot, but that's not the entirety of the list because we have a second Harlequins patrol. This one also out of Soaring Spite because that's how GT 2022 works. 3 additional troops in this detachment, 2 of them with that Harlequins Caress combo, 1 of them with a little extra 1 Harlequins Caress, 1 Harlequins Embrace, as well as a Troop Master with a Harlequins Kiss. 3 more Starweavers in that detachment to carry those players around. So for those keeping track, that is 3 Troop Masters, 9 Harlequin troops, and 9 Starweavers to make up the bulk of this list. That's it. It's all troops. Now, before we move on to the matchups that this list played, let's talk a little bit about why this style of list is good. Harlequin Troopers are one of the most combat-effective troops options in the entirety of 40k. They can move over models, fall back, and operate normally thanks to that Rising Crescendo and Flip Belts ability, and this includes being able to shoot and charge, meaning that even a single Harlequin trooper left alive from a unit is going to be able to be basically fully combat effective. When they're embarked on a transport, like we talked about earlier, thanks to that Soaring Spite subfaction ability, they can shoot pistols while the transport advances around, giving them an effective 28 inches of threat range to their fusion pistols, 25 inches if you want to get within that 3-inch sweet zone in order to roll your 2 dice and pick the highest for your fusion damage. Being Harlequin troop units, they also have access to Twilight Encore, so they can potentially pin enemy units in place even after the enemies fall back, and they can use the Sky Stride or Curtain Fall stratagems to get back into transports after they fight, meaning that even disembarking and making an attack or 2 into your opponent's chaff infantry to clear them off objectives, then popping back into the transport is a-okay. And like we talked about before as well, they have 4 attacks apiece with reroll to wounds in melee thanks to those troop masters, meaning they're both good at range, both good in melee. You have to kill entire troops to stop them from digging into your backline, fusion pistoling your characters to death, and stealing your objectives away with objectives secured. Even a single Harlequin trooper can be relatively dangerous by themselves. So with the immense amount of maneuverability and spikes of damage output that this list has, it certainly has a high skill cap, but again, can play the primary objectives exceedingly well with a mass amount of objectives secured in these super duper fast transports. So let's talk about exactly how it did in each of its matchups. Round 1, Ben was paired against Toby Wilcox and his Necrons. This is a pretty non-standard Necron list. We do see a Catan Shard of the Void Dragon, which can be pretty problematic for a style of list like this because it has so many vehicles that the Catan Shard of the Void Dragon can start healing off of when he blows them up. But a lot of the list was actually sunk into a Monolith, who is not particularly the most optimal choice, and unfortunately, Toby ended up going down 94 to 52. That brought us into round 2, this time against Sergei Vikanus Grey Knights. This is a relatively standard Grey Knights list focused a lot on interceptors. Now, interestingly, we did not have, as far as I can see, an objective secured aura anywhere in this list, which means those little Harlequin troops able to run around the table and obsec objectives away from the interceptor squads can make it very difficult for them to be able to hold down primary objectives. And unfortunately for Sergei's, we saw him go down 93 to 15. This put Ben close to the top of the standings going into round 3, and we'll see this sort of continue over the course of the game, with most of Ben's wins being very high scoring. That meant that as long as he could remain undefeated, he had a pretty good chance of taking down the event, despite the fact there were multiple undefeateds, because he was getting so many victory points each game. This third game, though, I think would prove to be a challenge. This is versus Luke Garsine's Tau Empire, and this was a Borconcept list. Now, the reason that that's challenging for a Harlequins list like this is that Harlequins have essentially no armor saves to speak of, relying entirely on their invulnerable saves to keep them alive. And unfortunately, the Borconcept stratagem experimental weaponry can fire through invulnerable saves and ignore invulnerable saves with one weapon per turn. Now, that said, I think we only have a Riptide battlesuit as a very good target for that, alongside some Hammerhead gunships that are going to innately ignore invulnerable saves with their heavy railgun shots. But unfortunately for Luke, it didn't end up being enough, and he did go down 89 to 34 points. Another potential weakness of this Tau list, to be fair, is that it is a little bit light on indirect fire. I don't see a lot of air-bursting fragmentation projectors or smart missile systems across the entirety of the list, which means that the Harlequins list may have been able to play the keep-away game well enough to stop those big, heavy, invulnerable save ignoring guns from getting a bead on his transports and doing too much damage in one turn. But that did put Ben on to the 4th round, this one versus Mark Pinder's Adeptus Custodes. That's right, chat. We hit the 2 big boogeymen in the meta with this Harlequins list, both Adeptus Custodes and Tau Empire. This was a pretty standard Emperor's Chosen build of Adeptus Custodes. I did literally just have a video come out yesterday about this style of Adeptus Custodes list with 3 units of Versus Praetors. If you want to go check that one out, I highly recommend it. I talk about everything that makes Adeptus Custodes good and why they're winning all their games. But unfortunately, they didn't win this one, and Mark Pinder ended up going down 58 to 90 to Ben Allen's Harlequins. That massive fusion, I imagine, was able to sink through and eventually start forcing those failed invulnerable saves on these expensive Custodes models. And once that starts happening, the game goes pretty south pretty quickly, especially since you can't really stop the Harlequin troopers from shooting those fusion pistols. And that put us into the final game versus Simon Edwards. Necrons again. Somehow we got Necrons twice in a row. This time a Novak list, bringing a big brick of Necron warriors alongside a bunch of Flayed Ones and Scorpec destroyers, as befits a Novak list, and the Silent King himself to give some reroll wounds out there. And this game ended up being an absolute barn burner. Ben taking it 83 to 82, a 1 VP differential to put him at 5-0 and in the top spot of the event. So congratulations to Ben for taking it down with Harlequins. Certainly not an easy faction to play. Harlequins have a ton of movement shenanigans and stratagems you have to use at exactly the right time in order to play them successfully, and you have to be super duper up on your primary objective and scenario play in order to be able to get these big wins with them. But he was able to do that and was rewarded with a 5-0 GT result. So big congrats. That last game looks like it was absolutely incredible with a 1-point differential. That's super wild, and taking on Tau and Adeptus Custodes on the way can't hurt either. But anyway, that's all I have to say about this one. Bit of a quick tech talk for today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thanks everyone for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks so much to everyone who supports the channel over on patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are phenomenal, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and happy wargaming. That's right, everybody. While they're staring down the barrel of a brand new codex with a bunch of... I think I hit my microphone there.